This is Nobody Cares. Okay, I think I've talked enough about the big house, but I was thinking about it afterwards, and I think I've got the dimensions wrong of the commissary there. What I gave you is a little bit too small. It's probably more like 24 by 32, something like that. Not a big deal. I also wanted to do a commercial for Coke because at that time, I don't know if it's still true or not, but Coke provides their product at their cost to at least the federal prisons in the United States. I don't know about state. So it's pretty decent of them to do that. I don't know how much of a savings that is, but whatever. It's just a decent thing to do, so I wanted to mention that. And also about wages. You can earn up to maximum of $75 working in the commissary, which I got to that number, not right away. It took a few months. When I was working as a janitor, if you just do prison work, you get 11 cents an hour. So being paid like 3 hours a day was 33 cents a day, pretty much a joke, right? The factories, all the prisons have factories, and most inmates have to work in them because they're indigent or don't have money. The factories pay 44 cents an hour, and so for a month at 160 hours, that works out to $70. It's pretty sad, really, but that's just the fact. That's the way it is. We were allowed to spend, when I first went in there, it was $90 a month in the commissary, and that went up to $100 a month before I got out. Wages did not go up in the factories. So we worked hard. We did work hard in the commissary. Once we started, it was nonstop. We'd go. And with the extra that we had to put up, getting the $75, so that was nice, more than what the other guys were making and working 160 hours a week. The other guy that I worked with inside the big house, he eventually got to $75 as well. It took him a little bit longer, but the guys at the camp never got that much. They didn't have to put up with all the same BS that we did. And I'm not going to go on much about the camp, really. I've already mentioned it, commerce, and you can kind of see that on your own. I'm not going to talk about it too much. My roommate that I had in the camp, a guy by the name of Dan Weinling, he worked in the kitchen. The way it works is that it all goes by seniority where you are and where your bunk is. So you start off in a dorm on a top bunk, and then you go to a bottom bunk, and then you go down to the ranges, and you start off on a top bunk there, and then eventually you go to the bottom bunk on the ranges. And it doesn't take very long in the camp, really. There's quite a high turnover of people. And when Dan's turn came, he came in, I had the bottom bunk, he came in, he was on top. And when his name came up to move to a bottom bunk, he turned that down and decided just to stay with me because he knew what he had and he wasn't sure who he would end up with by changing. So, yeah, we did. We get along great, and it stayed that right till the time that I got out, just Dan and I. And Dan worked in the kitchen, so that was pretty handy. I could always, if I asked, I could get a hard-boiled egg or a tomato, and which you need to make the guacamole. And we sold the jalapeno peppers are also an integral part of the prison guacamole, and we sold those in the commissary. So, but my main goal down in the camp was a cheeseburger. Every time that there's a hamburger meal like chili or meatloaf, something like that, and they bring down a big, a couple 100 pounds of hamburger, whatever it is, the cooks in there lop off a chunk for themselves, 2, 3, 5 pounds. I don't even know how much. And they make burgers out of that for themselves. Now, this is a tough club to crack, this one, because, it just is. They keep it pretty much to themselves. But I wanted one, and I felt like with my access to the ice cream and avocados, and with Dan on my side, he got on board with me, and eventually it did happen. It took a long time. It took months. It's almost like somebody has to die or get out before you can get on the hamburger list. So eventually that did happen, and I can tell you it's the best damn cheeseburger I ever had. When you go through that much to get something, as small as it was and as insignificant as it seems, it was pretty special. Now, the majority of the people that are in prison that I was in, Sandstone first and then down at the camp at Leavenworth, were in there for drugs. And I'll say it's at least 70% of the population is in there for drug offenses. And but I thought I would just rattle off a few names here and people that I got to know and why they were in there just for something to do. Tom Morris. Tom Morris was my bridge partner. He was from St. Louis, and he had started a barter system in St. Louis. And the authorities had heard about this, and they came to him and told him that he should not do this, that the government disapproved of this. And his attitude was that the United States is a free country. I'll do what I damn please. And so he went ahead with it. Barter system being hooking up a painter with an electrician, and they swap services with each other. No money changes hands. And so they charged him, and it's actually the charge is treason, undermining the economy of the United States. Judge gave him 5 years. Milton Libby was from Ames, Iowa. I think he was a chartered accountant, and him and some of his buddies, a little gang of outlaws, found something in the Tax Act or in the Constitution that they interpreted to mean that if you disapproved of the military, the spending on the military, that you could deduct that portion from your taxes. So if they spent 5% of the GDP went to military, that you could deduct 5% of your taxes that you owed. They were told they were wrong. They decided to take it to court because they thought they were right. Judge said they were wrong. 5 years. Bingham was an IRS man, and he thought that because of his stature that he could cheat on his taxes. He was wrong. And I don't know how much time he got, but I can tell you this, he was not a very popular man just because of that and who he was, and I can understand that. Then we had the guy we called the cheese man. He had 6 months. The government down there, part of their welfare system, they buy bulk cheese, huge amounts, and if you qualify, then you can go there and they give you cheese. He was convicted of stealing cheese, and I don't know how much or what the circumstances were, but when we heard about it, we just joked amongst ourselves that, if he'd asked, they probably would have given it to him. Gator, he was from some southern state, and he was poaching alligators. I just can't imagine, like, you put your rubber boots on, buy gas for your truck, and drive out to the swamp and slog around until you find an alligator. And you have to be careful where you shoot it because you don't want to ruin the skin, so it's got to be a headshot. And he was charged with having two 6-foot alligators that he'd killed illegally. And once you do that, then you have to skin them, so there's that on top of it. Then you take to whoever the buyer is, and you get paid $1 a foot. So, really a bright guy, Gator was. All that for $12. 6 months. We had the Bolivian national tennis champion in the camp there, and I didn't really know him that well, and he didn't speak, his English wasn't very good, but his story was that, I come to the States to play tennis, they don't look in my bag, I go home. I come to the States to play tennis, they don't look in my bag, I go home. I come to the States to play tennis, I put a kilo of cocaine in my bag, they look in my bag. The guy who lived right across the range from me, I'm not going to give you his whole name. Charlie was his first name, and I got to know him pretty good, obviously. He lived right across from me. And his parents were from the Beat generation, which preceded the hippies. It was the beginning to the awakening of youth in not just North America, but in Europe and around the world. I guess with the media and whatever all the reasons were or not. But anyway, so he was a product of the Beat generation, and they called themselves beatniks. Like I say, they preceded the hippies. Charlie had never been to school. He was homeschooled. Charlie had never cut his hair, and he had never shaved his beard, ever. He was a little bit older than me. I don't know, maybe as much as 10 years even. I hadn't really thought about it too much. What Charlie would do is he would take his hair, and it was perfectly straight, and he would tuck it around behind his ears, and then he'd put on a T-shirt, I should say that first, And his beard, he would tuck the beard into the front of his T-shirt and his hair into the back of the T-shirt and pull the hair around behind his ears. And, at that point, you could put a suit on the man and, send him into the boardroom. Well, maybe not, but, you could get a table at Denny's anyway, for sure. He was quite the character. Something to do, he was the most time that you could get in the States by law down there, it doesn't matter how much you had, was 5 years. And Charlie had 5 years, something to do with a ship with 20 tons of Jamaican weed. Charlie had his job. He was a janitor somewhere. I just forget where. It doesn't matter. Some little job sweeping the floors in one of the departments. And then he spent a bunch of time in the music room, which I didn't know very much about that either. But you could have an instrument sent in, and then they would store it for you. And then when you wanted, you could check it out and sit in the music room and practice and play. And that's what Charlie did. I wasn't really aware of that actually at first. Well, not until later. So one day, Charlie says to me, he said, "Would you like to see a picture of my family?" And I said, "Well, yeah, sure." Now, I thought this was a little bit odd because when Charlie had moved, he'd come down from a medium as well down into the low security. I don't know where that was. But he had moved his family to the Leavenworth area when he got moved there. And the visiting hours were very generous there. It was every weekday evening you could have visitors, and then on the weekend it was Saturday and Sunday afternoon plus the evening. And his wife and 2 kids, they came every day. Everybody knew Charlie's wife and 2 kids. So when he said to me, "Would I like to see a picture of his family?" I thought it was a little bit odd, but anyway, I said, "Yeah, sure." So I followed him over to his drum, and he pulls out this, it was probably 8 by 10 picture, and the picture was taken in a park, and it was a picnic table, and there was a trunk of a mature tree in the picture as well. And leaning up against that tree and leaning up against the picnic table and on top of the picnic table and on the benches of the picnic table were guitars. There was probably at least a dozen. And he just starts in talking about these guitars, where he'd obtained them, how much he'd paid for them, and there was a story to go with each one. They'd all belonged to a band member that I didn't recognize all of the bands, but Charlie knew them. Now, he didn't have a Keith Richards or Jimmy Page or anything like that, but he did have a few. I did recognize the name, and he obviously knew the rest. And he went on and on and on about this. He's very proud of all his guitars. And so it was a picture of Charlie's family of guitars. The reason I mention that is because on long weekends, Labor Day and May long weekend, we used to have there would be I don't know what you call it, like a variety night, because we had several bands in there. People that got together and practiced and played, and were obviously interested in that. And so, we would all gather, or you could if you want, and these guys would put on a show for us. And Charlie, but some good bands. I remember the one from Louisiana, who was a shrimper who was in there for smuggling marijuana. They had a great little band, and there was 4 or 5 different acts, and it was something to do, right? And they were entertaining, and Charlie always went last. He was a tall man too. He was like 6'4", and Charlie would get the hair out and get the beard out, and his electric guitar. This is what he'd been doing all these mornings, all by himself, practicing on his guitar. And he would turn the volume up as high as it would go, which wasn't very high. And he would do this show. I'm telling you, it was the wildest thing. I think he actually was making it up as he went along. I didn't really recognize any of the riffs but it was very, very entertaining. And he would fly around the stage and wailing on this guitar. And it would just make me think about Jimi Hendrix, because back in the 70s, they used to have these big concerts where there would be several well-known bands, playing in a row. And nobody would follow Jimi Hendrix on stage, because you can't do that. You have to leave the best till the last. And Charlie was the best. And old FCC Leavenworth, we had our own Jimi Hendrix, and Charlie put on quite the show. So I know that really wasn't much of a story, really, but I did want to mention Charlie because he was such a unique character. Never met anybody like him before or since. And I lived right across from him for at least a year. And I guess the other reason is because next week I'm going to talk about Phil, who was my other neighbor right next to me. And same thing with him. We were neighbors for at least a year, more than that probably. And like I mentioned, Charlie had the 5 years for weed, and Phil had 5 years as well, except that his charge was substantially just about 3 pounds of weed. Now, there were extenuating circumstances. So like I say, that story is next week. But I'm not telling the story just for the story. I have a point that is important to me that I'm going to make by telling that story. And then we're going to move off this topic onto some other stuff that I've got recorded. And for the rest of this episode, I've got 3 reasonably short stories, things that happened in prison that I think you might find interesting. So breakfast is 6 to 7:30, and it's just come whenever you're ready. Come and go as you please. And I'm usually one of the first guys down there. Always up early. And so grab a coffee and a couple pieces of toast, look around for a familiar face. Sit down, and guy says, have you heard the news? And I hadn't. He said, 2 guys took off last night. Oh, well, that is news because nobody does that, even though, there's no fence. The doors aren't locked. You could literally leave anytime you want, but they will hunt you till the end of time, find you, and give you more time, and you're going to serve the rest of your sentence plus the new time, and you're going to do it in a medium prison, so you might as well just stay in the warehouse and live out your time. That's what everybody does. But like everything, it takes a little while. It wasn't until a little bit later that day I got some more news about it, and turned out it was 2 Mexicans that had taken off. And they were getting short, and they were scheduled for... When they finished their sentence, they were going to be handed over to immigration and be deported back to Mexico. And they did not want that. They did not want to go back to Mexico. They were quite happy where they were. Now, they just left sometime in the night. I don't know how far town was. It was close to town at Leavenworth. And they just walked to town. Walked down the road, went right into town, and... No, they didn't break into a liquor store and go crazy. They didn't steal a vehicle. They just went to a park that was somewhere kind of in the middle of town, and there was a bench there, and they sat down and waited to be arrested. And that's what happened. In the morning, they were spotted and they were arrested. What happened to them, I don't really know, but just makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like, they wanted, I'm sure, not to be deported. They wanted to get the extra time and stay right where they were. Well, that wouldn't happen. They'd go to a medium prison for sure. They had nothing in Mexico. Nothing. In prison, they've got a room to themselves. They've got 3 meals a day. They've got access to a doctor, a dentist. They had a job, such as it was, 44 cents an hour, but hey, work all week. Get your $70. You could work overtime if you wanted. Make a few more bucks doing that, and access to the commissary, get an ice cream every week, go there and buy some jalapeno peppers, which I'm sure they would have done, take that to the mess with you, jar of those every week probably, have some pop perhaps, you get your insulated mug, you can buy one of those, hot water on the range, you can make coffee, or we also had commercial ice cube maker, there's always ice cubes available, buy some pop, fill up your mug with that, go down and watch the basketball game on Friday night. That's what they wanted. The best life that they could envision was FCC USA. So at Sandstone, we had a place where all us Canadians would gather, and that was at the gym. And the gym was oversized, and they had half-court basketball, and then on the other side there was a couple of handball courts, and there was a weight room, music room, and a bunch of other things. And there was a balcony, and the balcony ran all the way down the one side and then across the end. So it was just halfway around the gym. And we had the corner up there, and there was always about 10 or 12 of us Canadians in there. Somebody'd get out, somebody'd come in kind of thing. And any night you could go there and there'd always be a half a dozen Canadians up there, and we would just sit and BS or play cards or play dominoes. And so this one night we're up there and sitting around, and we hear this scream. And not like a woman scream, it was like a man, like, ah, like that. And so we jump up and look over the side to see what's going on. And what I saw was a black guy laying on the floor and a guard standing kind of right over top, hovering sort of over top of him, holding a 10-inch butcher knife. They immediately locked down the gym. And we don't know what's going on, but they lock down. They tell everybody to come down from the balcony area and everybody that's in the gym to assemble. And they got us all standing in lines, whatever. We found out later that what had happened is that Slim was this guy's nickname. He was a black man and a tall, slim guy. He had got stabbed just before he entered the gym. And he walked into the gym, up to the hack, pulled the knife out of his gut, and handed it to the hack, and then he collapsed on the floor. So we didn't know anything about that at that point. So it's kind of a nervous thing. You don't know what's going on, right? And obviously something very serious. And it's quite tense. So anyway, the hack gets on his radio and calls his superior, and whoever the most senior person on working that night came over, and a couple other hacks. And they just get down on their knees and start questioning Slim. And we can't really hear what's being said, but it's quite obvious that they're interrogating this guy. I mean, he's laying there fucking dying probably, and they're paying no attention to his medical needs. They're going to solve this crime, which I guess they did. And it seemed to take a long time. It's hard for me now to go back and even estimate how long it was. It's probably not as long as I think, but anyway, at some point they're satisfied. They get up off their knees. Slim's still laying there. There wasn't much blood, I can say that. In fact, very, very little. And they finally get a gurney and load him up on that and take him to the prison infirmary, prison hospital. And then they end the lockdown and we're allowed to go. Now, I don't remember now when we started to get news about all this, probably a little bit that night and then the next day a lot more. And we found out that at some point during the night, now the prison does have a doctor, and the chances are he wasn't on site because it's night, and that's reasonable that he wasn't there, but he would have been called and had to come in. At some point he does make the decision that he needs medical attention, proper medical attention. Gee, really, like how long does that take to figure out, you fucking idiot? And they call an ambulance, load him up, and take him to Duluth. And that's an hour's drive, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm sure it is. It's at least an hour. Take him to the hospital in Duluth and get him into the operating room where he did die. The knife had slashed through his liver, and the cause of death was internal bleeding. So we learned a little bit about what led up to this, and apparently Slim was selling weed in there. We all learned that weed was $50 a spoon. Now, a spoon is a level tablespoon of weed. Now, it was all cleaned up. There's no seeds or twigs or anything like that in there, so it's just all powdered fine, the good stuff, right? But still, wow, $50. And that it was a lawyer from L.A. that he'd been dealing with, and he ripped the guy off. He ripped this guy off somehow. I don't know exactly what he did. And the lawyer took exception to this. He hired a Cuban guy who was in there. This Cuban was only doing 2 years. They stole a knife from the kitchen, and, well, you know the rest of the story. Now, they were charged. They were arrested that same night, and we never saw them again, obviously. They were carted away or down into solitary and charged. And there was eventually a trial, and they were both found guilty of murder. I don't think it was first-degree murder, so probably maybe even manslaughter. I don't really remember, but they received life sentences anyway. Now, there is policy in there about the kitchen and knives. And that policy is that at the end of every shift, every knife has to be accounted for, physically accounted for, which is a very sensible policy, obviously. There's commercial cooks in there that are civilians that come in to supervise the preparation of the meals. The inmates do basically all the work, but these commercial cooks are there to make sure that everything is done correctly and amounts and whatever. So I would think that it's probably their responsibility initially to make sure that these knives are present. But this goes all the way up the chain, okay, to the superintendent of the guards, all the way up to the warden. And his name was Lacey, Warden Lacey, okay? That, and if they cannot account, if there's a knife missing, they are to do a search. They should immediately lock down the kitchen, first of all, and search just to make sure it hasn't slipped off somewhere and fallen in between something and just that sort of thing. If it cannot be found in the kitchen, then they are to lock down the entire prison and do a search. They did not do that. I'll just let everybody make what they want out of that. Well, I've got this to say. Yes, there was a murder that night in Sandstone, and I was there. But murder wasn't the only crime that was committed. Okay, so we got to talk about gays in prison because it just should be. So, I don't know, I've read somewhere it's like 10% of the population. I have no clue whether that's right or not. But I think that anybody who had any tendencies or hidden thoughts about gay or bi, that they would come out when you're in prison. I don't fall into that category. I'm a heterosexual man. That's confirmed for sure now. But it's not so much the gays. It's actually, I should say, it's a little unfair, really, for the heterosexual population when the gays have access to that sort of contact. But anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about was the girly boys. And in at Leavenworth, it turns out there was none, which was kind of odd, because in Sandstone there was maybe a half a dozen, 4 or 5, and it makes you wonder what's gone wrong. Like some chromosomes get mixed up, because these are girls, really, they wannabe girls who ended up with the wrong equipment. And it's kind of hard on your head, actually. You know, you get up in the morning and go down, take a leak, and throw some water on your face, and go to the sink and throw some water on your face, and the guy next to you is doing his hair and putting his makeup on. Maybe that's going a little far. It wouldn't happen with the makeup, you know, just on every morning. People are working. But during the leisure time, and it's not like we sold makeup in the commissary, we didn't, but somehow they've got it figured out. They get stuff out of the kitchen like powdered drinks, red powder, and I don't really know, so I can't really go on about it here, but they get eyeliner, black stuff and red stuff and lipstick stuff and whatever, and do their girl thing. And they even go further than that. There was one guy, I remember his name was, I forget all their names. Dee Dee was the one that was in C1. And there was another guy who was Snow, which was kind of an odd name because he was black. But he'd shave his legs and get his makeup on and do his hair. Well, it was kind of short anyway. And then they get like a double large T-shirt and put that on, and then put a belt on and make a dress out of it. Now, like I say, it's hard on your head to see this, because you're actually looking at a woman when they do all that stuff to them. And it just causes trouble. Like the gays, they're all vying for the attention of these girly boys, I call them. I don't know if that's the right name or not. But there was a cell block that hadn't been open, and it was kind of small. It's kind of hard to describe. It was sort of in the middle of not the yard, but it's a big square where all the cell blocks are in a square. And the one end of it, towards the administrative building, there was this other smaller cell block. I think it might have been used for segregation at one point. And anyway, they decided to open that up. And I was one of the guys that was moved over there. Now, I was already in the bottom bunk. I have no idea why they moved me. There was no, it wasn't punishment. It wasn't a reward. I think they just randomly selected people. And somehow I was one of the guys that got selected. So I move over there, I got a bottom bunk again. And it was a little bit different than the ranges, because the ranges, it's just like a long lane and there's cells on either side of it. And we didn't call them that, like drums, whatever. But this one, like, it was more open. The cells went around the outside walls of this, and the center part of this building was open. There was actually some tables where you could sit down and play cards or do whatever. And this one day, and I'm there, and I'm out in the center, and all of a sudden there's this ruckus. And we had this little girly boy in there. I forget what her name was. I should have mentioned, first of all, that there was this guy in there who was a Hell's Angel. Rooster was his nickname, and he was vice president of some chapter from somewhere. I don't know where, I don't really care. But he was a big guy. He was slim, but he was tall. And I had talked to him a little bit, but just, hi, how are you, kind of thing. He seemed all right to me. There was 3 of them all together in Sandstone, and when they got out in the yard, the 3 of them together, then the attitude would come out, But like, fuck them, who cares? So anyway, we got this Hell's Angel, and I don't know what started it. I wasn't really paying much attention. And this girly boy, all of a sudden, she goes flying at him. She's screaming and scratching and throwing her little fists at him. It just kind of overwhelms him. She's got him backed up, and she, like I said, ki-ying and screaming and scratching. And now somebody was looking out, and they yelled 6. Now, that means danger, stop. It means a variety of things. Generally, it means the hacks come and quit whatever you're doing if you're not doing something if you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. So he yells 6, and so everybody stops, and Rooster, he kind of turns away, and I just stayed where I was. She goes in her drum, and this hack walks in, and now I'm sure that he can tell that something's wrong. Things aren't quite normal, right? And so he does a little tour. He walks around, and we're all pretending to be busy, like everything's fine, normal. And he's not in there very long, couple minutes, 5 at the most, walks all the way around, doesn't say anything, and then goes back out the front door. Now, Rooster, he's got to do something. He can't let this go, right? And so he gets up, and he goes down towards her cell. Now, if the man had been smart, there was plenty of room. Like, he could have circled out and come more directly towards the front of her cell, but he didn't. If he had gone towards the center of her cell from straight on, he would have had a much better chance, but he doesn't. He goes straight sideways, comes to the front of her door, and she comes flying. She's ready. She comes flying out of there again, screaming and throwing her little fists, like she's only about 5'6", and she's all over again, got him backing up and trying to protect himself. And it's really quite funny. And the hacks come back in, only this time there's 2 of them, because he knew that he'd missed, there was something going on in there, so he brings another hack with him. And that was the last time we ever saw Rooster or the little girly boy. They got taken out of there and thrown in solitary. Now, there's different ways that they can deal with internal little problems like that. You can be confined to your cell for a week or 2 weeks, or you get a week in the hole in solitary, or they can ship you out. And in this case, they shipped these 2 guys out, which I didn't think the offense was that serious. So there may have been some other extenuating circumstances from before that day. Probably was. Now, I don't know if you're keeping score at home or not, but on my card, I've got it Girly Boys 2, Hells Angels 0.